What happens when a CEO secretly returns to his very first store, only to discover that it's now destroying the very people who once believed in him? The automatic doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded strangely out of place in the heavy, stifling stillness. Evan Monroe stepped inside, a dark, worn collar coat draped over a cheap button, up shirt, his baseball cap pulled low, nearly hiding his eyes. No one in the store looked up, and no one recognized him as the man who had once founded and built this entire supermarket chain from nothing. There was no CEO name tag, no executive meetings. Evan was now just another new hire, silent among the shelves and under the weary glow of fluorescent lights. Store number 7, once the crown jewel in the retail empire he had created, was now just an empty shell. The shelves leaned sideways, the products scattered as if a storm had passed and no one had bothered to clean up. No customer greetings, no friendly eyes. The air was thick, suffocating, as if all life had been drained from the place. At checkout lane 3, a woman in her early 30s was scanning items. Her hair was hastily tied back, her eyes puffy, and her hands trembled slightly even as she tried to smile at customers. Evan picked up a box of cereal, pretending to browse, but his gaze never left the woman. Lana. The moment she turned away to discreetly wipe a tear with her sleeve, he knew he hadn't imagined it. She was crying, right there in the middle of her shift, in front of customers, beneath security cameras. Suddenly, a voice rang out, sharp and loud like a whip cracking through the air. "Crying on the job again, Lana?" Evan turned instinctively. From the stockroom emerged a broad-shouldered man wearing a black vest embroidered with the word supervisor. His face was flushed, and he slammed a folder hard on the counter. "I warned you. If you can't control your emotions, step aside and let someone else do the job." Lana froze, biting her lip until it bled, then whispered, I'm sorry, I'll be fine." The supervisor, Mitch, wasn't finished. He leaned in, voice low and threatening. "You've already taken 2 days off this month. Don't be surprised if you have no shifts next week." Lana nodded faintly. No one spoke up for her. The other employees kept their heads down, and the customers looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Evan stood behind a shelf, motionless. His chest tightened. Not from anger, but from a pain that words couldn't contain. What he had just witnessed was not discipline. It was intimidation, pure and simple. In 30 years of building Grayson's Market, he had never allowed this to happen. And yet today, under dim lights and the stale smell of old coffee in a room that felt void of spirit, the very store that bore his name was now a place where human dignity was being buried. Evan walked slowly down the aisles, and everything seemed to shatter under his gaze. The bread section sat empty, the wilted produce had been abandoned, and a promotional sign lay bent beside an overflowing trash bin. He had once believed that if you treated your employees with kindness, they would carry that kindness to the customers. But that belief was now being betrayed by the very system he had built. Evan paused beside the dairy shelf, once his pride for its clean, logical arrangement and its consistency in being fully stocked before opening hours. Now the trays were empty, milk cartons tilted out of place, and several price tags stuck in the wrong locations. He bent down to pick up a loose shallot that had rolled from the produce section, but there wasn't a single employee in sight to hand it to. The place that had once run with precision and professional pride now lingered with a musty smell, dim lighting, and shadows that moved in silence. Standing among the disarray, he suddenly recalled a board meeting from 3 weeks ago. Amid stacks of sales charts, there had been a brown envelope with no sender's name. Inside was a single, hastily written line: "Someone in your system is being pushed to the edge. Investigate before it's too late." The regional managers had scoffed. One had muttered, "Probably just another Gen Z kid upset about not getting a raise." Another added, "If we paid attention to every complaint letter, we'd never get anything done." Evan had stayed silent, but he couldn't forget the tone in that letter. It wasn't angry, it was a cry for help. Now, after seeing Lana's defeated eyes and the silent resignation of every staff member around her, he understood. The warning had been real, and worse than any drop in quarterly numbers was a store where the people inside had lost faith in the worth of the work they did. Ahead, An elderly woman stood at the customer service counter for 3 full minutes without anyone assisting her. In the freezer section, a female employee struggled to catch her breath while stretching to place a price label high above. Everything operated as though people were simply holding on in a world where no one cared. Evan felt a chill down his spine. This wasn't stagnation anymore. It was the unmistakable sign of a team that had reached the brink of despair. The small details, the averted gazes, the clumsy motions, each quiet sigh, all painted a picture no performance report could capture. What unsettled him wasn't the disarray, but how everyone had learned to live silently within it. Evan stepped toward the housewares aisle, pretending to inspect a cheap aluminum pan, but his mind had already drifted far from the supermarket. He was replaying every detail of that anonymous letter, every hidden plea tucked within it. And then he knew. If he didn't act, no one would. Because the person who wrote that letter had already given everything before daring to speak. And he, the one with the most power in the system, was the last person left who could still hear them. The lunch shift had just begun. Evan walked slowly toward the vending machines, pretending to buy a granola bar, but in truth he was making his way closer to the back break room, where a faint yellow light spilled out from a door left slightly ajar. He didn't plan to go in, only to observe, to understand how his employees managed to survive after such grueling hours. But then he stopped. A small, trembling sob broke the silence. Evan froze, barely breathing, and tilted his head to listen. A voice, broken and choked, came from inside. I can't do this anymore. I've tried, but it's never enough. My hours were cut this week. I can't even afford gas. Rent is late again. It was Lana. Her voice, no longer composed as it had been at the register, shattered like fragile glass. Another voice, male, younger, cut in, hushed, but filled with frustration. Same here. Mitch targets anyone with kids or health issues or who dares to ask for time off. If you need time to live, he'll cut you. Lana whispered, barely holding back tears. My son had an asthma attack last night. I had to take him to the hospital. I asked to swap shifts and Mitch said I'm no longer reliable. Evan clenched the granola bar in his hand, the pain in his chest no longer a metaphor. Lana's voice was like a sharp, delicate blade slicing straight through his heart. Not out of blame, but because it confirmed his greatest fear, that the very system he built was pushing its most valuable people to the edge of despair. Now he didn't just see. It was no longer a suspicion. He had heard it. Not complaints, but truth. Not data, but lives pushed to the brink. When the break room door creaked open and Lana stepped out, her shoulders heavy, a faded handbag clutched tightly to her chest, Evan followed at a distance. She walked past the lot, toward an old sedan with peeling paint and duct tape on the rear window. She fumbled through her wallet, pulling out scraps, bills, an ID card, a nail clipper, then turned it upside down. A few coins dropped to the pavement, their soft clinks sounding like quiet accusations. And then, unable to hold it in, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Alone, in the middle of the empty parking lot. Evan stood behind a tree, wind slipping through his thin coat, but he didn't feel cold, only heavy, as if the entire building were collapsing onto his back. In the dim evening, the glow from the Grayson Market sign cast a light over her face. The woman, the mother, the loyal employee, being crushed by the very place that bore his name. Only then did Evan understand. He was no longer conducting an investigation. He was witnessing a moral accident, and if he didn't act now, the bleeding would continue. The next morning, before the sun had risen above the row of buildings to the east, Evan stood outside the doors of store number 7. No baseball cap, no torn coat. Today, he wore the employee uniform, a name tag pinned to his chest that read Knoll Trainee. His face was calm, but inside, a storm was layered and tightly contained. No one paid him any attention. No greetings were exchanged. He was assigned to the dry goods section. Next to a slender young man with glasses sliding down his nose and a mop of brown hair that looked untouched by a brush. New guy? the young man said without looking up from a box of cereal. Name's Tyler. Don't ask why people here don't talk much. Less talk, less trouble. Evan nodded, then casually asked a few questions about the job. But in Tyler's indifferent replies, he sensed something deeper. The young man wasn't apathetic. He had simply learned to survive by shrinking into himself. I've been here 2 years, Tyler whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. But lately it's suffocating. Mitch, the supervisor, he's been switching shifts all over. If you've got kids or family stuff, you're the first to get cut. Evan clenched his fist inside his jacket pocket. The flexible staffing policy he once approved was now being wielded like a whip. What about Lana? He asked quietly, pretending to rearrange some boxes of noodles. Tyler sighed, paused for a few seconds, then replied, She's the hardest worker we have. But ever since she missed 2 days to take her kid to the ER, her hours dropped to around 15 a week. Evan froze. He had once signed off on that same reduction in a performance report, thinking it was just a routine adjustment for productivity. But now that number had a face, a breath, a little boy who needed medicine, and a mother being pushed to the edge. At the end of the afternoon shift, Evan slipped into the back tech room during the handover between crews. He still retained an emergency technician login, and this was the time to use it. The internal scheduling system lit up. 3-month roster logs. He typed Lana Delaney. The chart appeared. 2 hours per week in the first month, 24 the next, 15 this week, and only 9 scheduled for the coming one. The internal note read, Unreliable, do not prioritize. Evan moved on to Tyler and other employees he had observed throughout the day. The same pattern emerged. Those who needed flexibility were slashed. Those who stayed silent and compliant were given more hours. Meanwhile, Mitch's inner circle had stable shifts, even slight increases. There was no doubt anymore. This was manipulation. Mitch was using the schedule as a weapon of control, shaping polished reports out of the blood and tears of those who couldn't speak up. Evan rose from the desk and walked slowly toward the manager's office. Today, he wouldn't reveal his hand. But tomorrow, the full truth would be laid on the table, and Mitch would have nowhere left to hide. That afternoon, Evan stood before the office door with an oddly calm expression. Inside, muffled country music blended with the sharp sound of papers being ripped. He knocked 3 times. "Come in!" a raspy voice called out. Mitch was lounging with his feet on the desk, a plastic coffee cup in hand, his face a mix of laziness and smug self-satisfaction. He looked at Evan and saw nothing more than another forgettable new hire. "What do you want?" Evan stepped in, his tone steady. "I heard people talking about Lana, how her hours were drastically cut. Is that true?" Mitch scoffed, leaned back in his chair and tilted his chin with an air of annoyance. "She's a walking drama machine. Always some excuse. Sick kid, family emergency. I don't have time to babysit that kind of baggage." Evan said nothing, but his gaze began to harden. If she asked for time off because her child was hospitalized and she gave advance notice, then Mitch cut him off, his voice rough and dismissive. "This is a job, not a charity. I need people I can count on. Everyone's got personal stuff. If we let them off for every little thing, who's left to work?" He let out a dramatic sigh, then leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Just between you and me, cutting hours, trimming staff. That's what corporate wants. Lower costs, cleaner reports, everyone claps." Evan didn't respond. He just stood there looking at Mitch. A man entrusted with authority, now wielding it like a blunt instrument, pounding down the lives of those most vulnerable. Not for efficiency, but for performance, for praise, on the backs of loyalty and struggle. As Evan left the office, his hand clenched inside his pocket, a cold sweat running down his back despite the hum of air conditioning. What he had just heard went beyond what he had expected. This wasn't just manipulation. This was the deliberate suffocation of a workforce, cutting shifts from a single mother, punishing employees with children, branding anyone who dared to live their truth as unreliable. Evan paused in the main aisle, lifting his gaze to the store sign in the distance. Grayson's Market glowed faintly beneath the fluorescent lights, but he no longer saw pride in those letters. He saw a name being used to legitimize cruelty. He pulled out his phone and called his personal assistant. "Janet, cancel all my meetings tomorrow." "But sir, the quarterly strategy session." "I know," Evan interrupted firmly. "But there's something more important. There are people paying the price for my silence. I'm going back to store number 7, not as a CEO, but as a man who needs to make things right." That night, Evan didn't return to his luxury penthouse. He checked into a modest motel a few blocks from the store. Sitting by the window, pale streetlight flickered across the notebook pages filled with names, shift hours, signs of fatigue. On the final page, he circled one name in red ink: Lana Delaney. Before turning off the lamp, he quietly looked at an old photo tucked in his leather wallet. The original team, smiling, shoulders touching. He whispered, "That's enough. Tomorrow morning I won't hide anymore." Show. Before dawn had fully broken, and condensation still clung to the supermarket's front glass, Evan Monroe arrived at store number 7, but this time, not under the guise of a temp worker. He stepped inside in a crisp gray suit, a carefully pinned blue tie, and a polished metal nameplate gleaming on his chest. Evan Monroe, Chief Executive Officer. His steps were measured, not rushed, but with each stride, the atmosphere in the store seemed to shift, from quiet to utterly still. A few employees looked up, stunned, then began whispering among themselves, "It's him. That's Mr. Monroe." Across the aisle, Lana paused as she scanned a product, her eyes locking with his. And without a word, she knew. The man who had rearranged the bread shelf just days ago was now revealed as the one who ran the entire system. Evan didn't wait. He walked straight to the customer service counter where Mitch was sipping coffee and muttering while adjusting the shift schedule. Mitch didn't look up, eyes glued to the papers, until a pair of polished leather shoes stopped in front of him. He looked up, eyebrows knitting with confusion. "Can I help you?" Evan spoke, low, clear, like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Who are you?" Mitch asked, brow furrowed. Evan opened his coat and held up the nameplate. Mitch visibly paled. The spoon in his coffee trembled slightly in his hand. His lips stammered, I'm the one who saw everything, heard everything, and now I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this store." Mitch swallowed hard. The sentence wasn't shouted, but it carried enough weight to make him step back half a pace. The staff had stopped moving, frozen along the aisles. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Evan stepped closer, his voice steady but sharp as steel. "We need to talk about the way you've been treating my employees." Mitch opened his mouth and tried to smile, weakly. "There's been some misunderstanding. I've just been trying to keep things running smoothly. Cutting the hours of a mother whose child is in the hospital. Is that your definition of smooth?" Evan asked, eyes unblinking. No one spoke. Lana held her breath at the checkout. Tyler froze mid-stock. Mitch was out of excuses. "We were optimizing costs, cutting hours to reduce overhead," Mitch muttered, quieter now. "That's enough," Evan said, cutting him off. His voice didn't rise, but each word landed like a hammer. "I'm not here to debate. I'm here to take back the keys." Mitch froze. His hand trembled as he pulled a keyring from his pocket and placed it into Evan's palm. "You're making a mistake," he mumbled through clenched teeth. "These people, they just want to be coddled. They don't really want to work." Evan looked him in the eye. "They have been working, under pressure you've never once had to carry." Mitch left, and not a single person saw him off. Evan turned back, his gaze sweeping across the staff. Still silent, uncertain, afraid. Then he spoke loud and clear. 10 minutes from now, meet me in the break room, all of you." No one objected. No one asked why. They simply nodded quietly. Because for the first time, someone had stepped forward to name what they thought had been forgotten forever. The break room at store number 7 had never been as crowded as it was that morning. Some stood, some sat, others leaned against the walls, hands still dusted with flour from the bakery or tinged with cold from the freezer. No one spoke loudly, and no one sat upright as they would in a regular meeting. This felt more like a reckoning, a moment of truth, where every gaze was fixed on one man, Evan Monroe. There was no podium, no microphone. He stood in the cramped room, hands clasped behind his back. A single breath of silence passed. Then he began. Not with the voice of a CEO, but as a man carrying the weight of regret. I'm the founder of Grayson's Market, and I have failed in the most important thing, ensuring that each of you is treated with respect. The air grew still, almost suffocating. A few eyes began to well with tears. Lana stood in the corner, arms folded tightly across her chest like a reflex to protect herself. Evan continued, voice steady but heavy with remorse. I've seen what's happening. I've heard it, witnessed it, and I believe you. From today, the way we run this store is going to change. And that change begins with an offer. He turned toward Lana. If you're willing, I'd like you to become the assistant store manager, officially, with full authority and trust. The crowded room seemed to lose all its air. Lana didn't move. She blinked, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. A beat passed, then she whispered, I've been marked in the system as unreliable. They said I was irresponsible, that I cried in front of customers. Evan nodded gently. And yet you kept showing up. You kept working, you supported your colleagues, you didn't walk away. The title I'm giving you today is simply a formal acknowledgement of what you've already been doing for a long time. A murmur spread through the room. Someone nodded. Someone else exchanged glances. Then Lana gripped her sleeve and steadied her voice. If you believe in me, I'll try my best. Evan smiled, the first warm smile in days. You don't need to try anymore, Lana. You've already done it. Now all you need to do is continue. When the office door closed behind her, Lana stood still for a moment. Not out of fear, but because she didn't yet know where to begin in this space. Once heavy with stale coffee and control, now waiting for a new breath. She sat down in the worn leather chair Mitch used to occupy and placed her hand on the computer mouse. The screen displayed the shift schedule. Lana began to read each name. Linda, 5 consecutive night shifts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Jorge, back shifts separated by only 8 hours. Cassie, no shifts at all, noted as frequent requests off for childcare. Each line cut like a blade through memory. Lana no longer saw herself as the only victim. He didn't just hurt me. He hurt the whole team, she whispered. Then she opened a new document. On the first line, she typed slowly but firmly. Morning shifts prioritized for single parents. No more than 3 consecutive night shifts. Employees with children or school commitments. Inform early, we will accommodate. With the final line typed, Lana looked out the window. Midday sunlight was spilling across the store shelves, and for the first time, she saw this store as a place of hope. Not because of a title, but because, for the first time, someone had listened and handed her the key to start over. That afternoon, just 5 minutes before the shift change, Lana sent out a simple internal message. 5:55 p.m., quick meeting in the break room. No title, no explanation. No. But everyone came. There was no Mitch, no clipboard slamming, no scornful glares, only Lana. In her regular uniform, hands still dusted from stocking shelves, standing in front of everyone, pausing for a moment before she began. I know the past few weeks have felt like hell, and I thought staying quiet was the only way to survive. She paused, eyes scanning the room, a space once shadowed by old power. But I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Not just for being silent, but for not standing with you sooner. Tyler, at the back of the room, lowered his head. Linda clenched her hands. A quiet nod came from someone in the back. Lana took a deep breath and continued. From today on, our work schedules will reflect our real lives. No one should have to choose between their job and their child. If I make a mistake, if anyone is treated unfairly, come to me. Or, if needed, go directly to Mr. Monroe. Silence held for a few seconds. Then a single clap rang out. Honest, unforced. Another followed. And soon, the whole room was applauding. Not with cheers, but with a collective exhale. A moment of relief from those who, for the first time, felt their voices might finally matter. After the meeting, employees dispersed, no longer rushing to avoid eye contact. Lana stayed near the door, searching for something unsaid. She saw Tyler pushing a box toward the back. Thin shoulders, a posture shaped by years of being overlooked. "Tyler?" she called softly. He turned, surprised. Is something wrong?" Lana approached. "You helped Linda train the new hire today, didn't you?" Tyler scratched his head shyly. "I'm not exactly the talkative type." Lana shook her head and smiled. "Mitch used to say you weren't fit for customer service. He also said I wasn't trustworthy. And yet, here I am." Tyler froze. For the first time, he really looked at Lana. "You listen. You're calm. You care. That's exactly who I need at the front. If you're willing, I'd like to start training you tomorrow." It took Tyler a moment to respond, but when he nodded, slowly, deliberately, it wasn't with excitement, but with the quiet relief of someone who had long believed they would never be chosen. A few days later, store number 7 wasn't perfect. But it was different. In the frozen section, an elderly woman fumbled for a product. Tyler stepped in gently. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" She smiled, surprised. "No one's asked me that in a long time." In produce, Linda hummed to the store music for the first time in weeks. Lana walked from aisle to aisle, head held high, eyes open, not just to get through the day, but to rebuild trust. A young employee helped a customer push her cart to the parking lot. Another picked up a fallen sale sign without being asked. From a distance, Evan Monroe stood quietly, no notebook, no camera. He needed no evidence. Because real change always shows in people's eyes, in their steps, in the space between one human and another. A week later, Evan returned. No assistant, no announcement, just a man in a pale shirt with a jacket draped over his shoulder. Along the main aisle, once a hallway of silence, now stretched a path of quiet smiles, initiative, and hope. Lana knelt down to hand a bear sticker to a little girl fussing at the checkout. Her mother smiled in thanks. Evan watched, unnoticed, and felt at peace. He stepped closer. Lana looked up, eyes wide in surprise. "I didn't think you'd come today," she said softly. Evan nodded, his voice light as air. "I didn't think I'd see it change this fast." Lana looked down, a bit shy. "I'm just trying to do right. Some days I still get scared. Sometimes I want to quit." Evan looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I know, but what matters is, you never did. I didn't give you this chance. You took it, every time you stood up after life knocked you down." Lana paused, her eyes a little red, her voice quiet. "I used to think I was just a replaceable part in the machine." Evan shook his head, serious. "You are the reason I still believe this company deserves to go on." As the late afternoon sun poured through the old plastic blinds in the manager's office, Lana didn't start up her computer. Instead, she taped a blank sheet of paper to the wall right above the monitor. On the first line, she wrote boldly in marker, "Schedules are meant to support, not to punish." Below that, she added, "Listen first, adjust second. Every hour worked is a piece of someone's life. No one should cry for fear of losing their job. Good people don't need to be controlled. They just need to be trusted." She paused, looking at the paper, then at her reflection in the metal cabinet mirror. Hair neatly tied, shirt clean, eyes still tired but bright. Lana smiled, not for the title, not for the praise, but because from now on, no one on her team would have to endure alone. At the end of the day, the glass doors closed gently behind the last customer. The warm lights dimmed into rest mode. Lana stood at register 3, the very place that once tested her to her limits. Marcus, now a full-time employee, trained a new hire nearby. Linda folded her uniform shirt and waved goodnight. Evan was no longer there, but she knew. He was still watching, like a father passing the keys to the next generation. Lana stepped outside and turned off the register lights. This time, when she stopped at the gas station on her way home, her wallet wasn't empty. Her hands no longer shook. She filled her tank, sat behind the wheel, and turned toward the back seat, where her young son slept peacefully. A gentle smile appeared on her face. Not for the position she earned, but for the fact she had refused to give up. A warm voice overfades in as the screen dims. Sometimes, to change an entire system, all it takes is listening to one person, and sometimes the strongest one is the person who broke down mid-shift, but still showed up the next morning. The screen goes black. A single line appears. If you saw yourself in this story, leave a dot. We're listening. A system does not collapse because of a lack of profit, but because it loses the trust of those who quietly keep it standing every single day. Evan's story is not just a journey of making things right. It is proof that leadership is not defined by a title, but by the courage to face the truth and choose to stand with people. If you believe that change begins with listening, make sure to like and subscribe to help us share meaningful stories like this one. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words "willing to listen," because perhaps that is the very first step toward fixing anything that has been broken.